asked to speak on a study that we're working on, the digital trade in the U.S. and global economies. And I thought I'd sort of summarize it for you and lay the groundwork for a study that we are, this part 2 of the study, which will be coming out at the end of the summer, that the Finance Committee also requested of us. And you know, the International Trade Commission, most of you probably think of us as chemicals and steel billets and trade remedies, but about a third of our work is these economic studies, and like the rest of the digital economy, we're changing too and getting much more of a high-tech agenda, high-tech digital trade research component of what we do. We are independent, bipartisan, fact-finding agency. I speak only for myself, of course. We're 6 commissioners, and I'm one of 6. But I think there is kind of general commitment to this area of our work. We really go out and do some of the raw material research for Congress to engage in the policymaking that they're going to have to do on the trade agenda coming up. We come up with sort of generally well-agreed, vetted data and analysis that describes the changes that the internet is making to the U.S. economy, and this provides Congress with some of the information they need to pick, you know, what our trade negotiating priorities will be in the Trade Promotion Authority bill. So what I'll be speaking about is a world that you know really well, but I think the issue for a sector like you and for your association is, are we describing it correctly in general terms for perhaps policymakers that don't spend every day down deep in the details of the business that you all do? Excuse me. The few of the highlights from our report is that, as we all know, the internet economy is very difficult to measure, and it's not measurable really in traditional terms. And I think it'll be a long time before there is a definitive assessment of the numbers. But for the things that we're describing is the industry profile, and we've got digital content. This is kind of what we're talking about, digital content providers, search engines, social media, communication services, email, text messaging, software services, and then cloud computing platform services. The size of the U.S. footprint is huge in the digital economy in the U.S. and globally. And these are probably the 5, it's really an interesting chart that's in our report. It's sort of a 3-dimensional web characterization of the big 5 in terms of revenue in our economy, and these are the big 5 globally. So you've got total annual sales. Apple has 170 billion, Microsoft 70 billion, Amazon 75 billion, Google 60 billion, and then Facebook is coming up quickly. I think they're at 8 billion, maybe moving up quickly to 11 billion soon. But these are expanding their presence in sort of the multiple segments of all of these newly developed technologies. And I think the point of this picture is that the big guys are developing an expertise and then quickly going into another innovative sector that another one of their competitors has developed. So you just see this sort of 3-dimensional web out there, competition in activities that didn't exist, you know, until very recently. The report talks a lot about describes a lot of things. I think one of the interesting things is the change, for example, in the advertising business in terms of what's going on in the business models. Online content and service providers now compete with traditional forms of advertising. And so you've got internet advertising has surpassed all forms of media advertising over the last 5 years, except for one area, which is the television, and they're pretty close to television at this point. So you get internet advertising is $37 billion in 2012, and the TV is $40 billion, and then that's ahead of cable TV, magazines, newspapers, radios, all the traditional outlets for advertising have really been dwarfed by internet advertising. Another aspect discussed in the report is the mobile environment and the ability to kind of customize local apps for local preferences in particular countries around the world. And then just the business tools that the social media platforms are offering, networking and so forth, and ways to discuss products and services among different groups by word of mouth. This is the geographic breakdown, just as to take one of the big companies. Their users, as you see here, the users are really pretty equally distributed geographically. The revenue is really focused, coming from the United States and from Europe on the right. Another area of the report is looking at sort of the ripple effects. I've looked at the big providers, the major part of the internet economy, and then secondly is just the ripple effects into the rest of what is going on in the economy. Retail, e-commerce, financial services, all of the business models in these sectors are really undergoing huge changes. Really no sector has escaped the transforming effects of the internet economy. Okay. This slide is kind of interesting in terms of revenue. These are all sales that could have taken place over the telephone earlier, but now we've got manufacturing. 46% of revenue is actually contracted over the internet that goes to manufacturing shipments in the United States. We came up with some observations about data collection. I know that's been a topic of your meetings here, but manufacturers actually collect more data than the federal government, which I guess is reassuring in the sense that it's not the federal government that's doing the most collection of data, but the second highest amount of stored data is the federal government. This was a survey I thought was interesting. Oxford Economics really surveyed business leaders. Who do you think, what part of the economy do you think is going to be more transformed in the future by the internet? And kind of predictable, IT and technology will be hugely transformed. 72% say that. Now, down at the bottom here, the government and the public sector, business experts don't think the government's going to be transformed by the internet. Not much is going to change in the government. Next, our report tries to get a handle on the numbers that we're talking about, and this is going to be a long-term process, I think, that will be a multi-institutional undertaking. Right now, the official statistics on cross-border services trade collected by the U.S. Department of Commerce Bureau of Economic Analysis are really the proxy that we use for digital trade. And BEA defines digitally enabled services as those for which digital information and communication technologies play an important role facilitating cross-border trade and services. So really BEA is not measuring the amount of trade in these industries, but it's sort of the value of dollars in 35 different service sectors that are IT intensive. But the numbers that, so we got a proxy really at this point, and we may be able to do better in our second report, but the numbers are still huge, $356 billion in exports, $221 billion in imports. One of the big stories, I think, particularly for you, those that are following the TTIP negotiations, digital trade between the U.S. and the EU dwarfs with the trade with other sectors of the world. So you've got exports to the EU is 42%, twice as much as our exports to Asia. Imports from the EU are 45% of our imports are from the EU, with only 22% from Asia. Huge amount of foreign direct investment in the EU, $84 billion. almost 3 times as much as in some of the other areas. And so it's really a story of dominance, developed countries, the U.S. and the EU, of course. There's some trends. Exports, both exports and imports are going up. Exports are going up more, so that's faster. That's good. A lot of great charts in this report. This is the geographic distribution of exports and imports. You can see the Europe theme there again. Outbound investment, that summarizes that $80 billion. A huge amount, a significant part of the report is barriers, and there's just trying to describe really what it is that's hurting business from the perspective of U.S. companies. And these are the ones that are familiar to you, and we've tried to document who's being hurt and by how much. Our second report will try to put some dollar values on these barriers to the extent that they're damaging U.S. exporters. We've got the next this second study will be issued to the Senate Finance Committee at the end of July, and I think it will be published publicly at the end of August. We'll be doing some econometric modeling and data analysis of both trade and trade barriers. Be some case studies. We've sent 10,000 questionnaires to companies in this sector, and actually folks are responding very well. And another theme that's really emerged is the beneficial impact on small and medium-sized companies, which is kind of a politically virtuous effect in the sense that it's a bipartisan concern of members of Congress to help the SMEs, and to the extent that we can keep the internet open, it does help SMEs access foreign markets. It was interesting. I wanted to go back, and I know Ed had come to testify at our hearing that we had last fall, and wanted to make sure that we were kind of responsive to what your companies were saying, as Ed articulated in his testimony. We agree with you that the internet is pervasive. Information discrimination is really fundamental strategic threat to our big 5 global firms in particular, and to the rest of our exporters. Digital trade needs to be a trade negotiating priority for the U.S., and I think while we don't do the policy at the ITC, I think you saw the Trade Promotion Authority bill and the Wyden-Thune bill built on our report and extracted from it as a way to start establishing negotiating priorities for trade agreements. And lots of information in your testimony on damaging barriers. I think we were discussing almost all of them in our report. The theme, as I mentioned before, that it's a crucial platform for SMEs, small and medium-sized companies. We'll talk more about that in the second report. And as you all rightly pointed out, we need to figure out how to modernize data collection and methodologies to fully measure the digital trade, the impact it's having, and this will be an ongoing process, which we really look forward to continuing to work with your group on. So I think with that, I'll stop there and be happy to take any questions if there are any.
Okay, let me thank you very much. And point out, which I think something everyone should be aware of, that trying to tackle this is no easy task. Yeah. And it's really, I think, you and the Commissioner to be commended for trying to get a handle on this, and I think doing a good job. I think it's particularly worth pointing out that Chairman Wyden now, in fact, has used what you've provided in creating some TPA priority. That's particularly important. And I think the report on barriers is where I think we want to focus a lot of attention. Very critical. So thank you for all that good hard work. Let me open it up a little bit to other folks, but I just did want to say thank you, and for paying attention and listening and identifying and getting ahead of what is very important going forward.
So, if I could sort of comment on that last bullet, I certainly the, the architecture of data collection is an incredibly tedious subject, but amazingly important because without asking the right questions, we'll never be able to answer these sorts of things. Do you see any? Do you have any hope about sort of updating our data collection structures to more accurately answer these, very tricky questions about, the export of internet-related services, or the sort of traditional economy that is enabled by digital services? Do you foresee us as so the United States in our data gathering, changing how we answer questions or ask questions to get better data on these very 21st century issues?
You said changing.
Well, yeah, so not to sort of get too down in the weeds,
Yeah.
but like if you look at North American industry classification codes, there's one has to do a lot of cutting and pasting to really get to anything that looks like the internet economy. And so we can't really say how important the internet economy is, because we're not really asking, we're not sort of polling about objective data on the internet economy. We know what the forestry industry is, because we go out and we collect that data, but the internet industry is still something of an abstraction, and we're not getting that kind of data presently, and I think I'm suggesting that that's something we need to do. Do you foresee any changes happening along those lines about how we're collecting data to answer these kinds of questions?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a problem that the OECD is looking at. We're looking at, the Bureau of Economic Commerce is looking at, BEA. And I think, I'm guessing that it's going to be, a 3 or 4 year process at least to kind of get at how we're going to tackle it. And we will be doing some, econometric estimates and so forth in our Digital 2 report, the next one that's coming out. But I'm not sure that there'll be huge. You'll appreciate the huge stride, or it will be a huge stride. I mean, I think it's going to be incremental in trying to solve it. I mean, we're so used to being able to collect imports and exports because we can count them, and they're associated with revenue, and it goes over the border, and you can click the box every time something is traded. But there really is not that physical way of tracking some of this stuff, or all of it. So I can't, give you any specifics about where it's going. I know, we are working hard at it, and, but it's going to be an iterative process, I'm afraid.
To follow up on the last question a little bit, I've read through the report. I'm very much looking forward to read the second report. It really is one of the things our industry has lacked for a long time. Is we know that the internet's having a profound effect on international commerce, international business, but so much of the trade policy regime is constructed on X barrier costs us Y amount of money, and therefore we have to take set steps. And it's been very difficult for our industry to articulate specific numbers and set framework. One of the areas we've been trying to reach out to is, in the ITCs, we're very thrilled that you guys are going down this path, is trying to get other organizations, international organizations, as well focused on this, whether this be the World Bank or the OECD, trying to take more steps to move the ball down the road, because frankly, we're still in the very nascent processes and putting numbers to these very important concepts. I was curious if you and or your staff has any contact with other groups, other economic shops, other people who do the sort of frontline primary source analysis that you guys do, and if you've seen anybody express interest from these organizations in either using the data you're coming up with or working with you on the methodology or anything like that.
Yeah, we actually, I expect us to do, we do collaborate now a lot, particularly with the OECD and the World Bank. And I think we're going to have a little bit more freedom to do that this year. With the budget going through, we know a bit more where we can send people and what kind of conferences we can host and so forth. So I'm thinking that there will be more activity in that area, and we're very open to it. And And actually, our economists are very much in demand at a lot of conferences that those international organizations are having. So it is something that we try to participate in to the extent that we can fund it, and we'll have a bit more opportunity to do that this year.
Let me follow up just with one specifically, having spent a little bit of time at both State Department and Commerce Department, and you're an independent entity, but it would seem like Commerce should be particularly focused on gathering information, and they have an organizational structure which is divided by sectors, and yet and I put USTR in the same thing. There's no TAC or industry sector advisory committee for the internet. That's one example and one thing we've tried to hammer it at. Commerce Department isn't really structured the same way. I suppose, like what I guess I'm saying is part of maybe you might want to think of in your recommendations is that various parts of the U.S. government focus not just on data gathering, but in fact their whole organizational structure to be rethought a little bit in the internet era to reflect the reality of how important the internet and the internet economy is. USTR is a particular one where we have specifically asked for some actions to be taken in terms of creating a special internet advisory committee. But clearly other agencies also, I think, could do a lot of rethinking about how they're structured, organized, and as an outside player but still part of the government, you might be able to be an important catalyst in that direction.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I mean, I think particularly at USTR, I used to work there, and so I have some appreciation for how few people they've been able to put on this project in terms of just the free digital trade flows.
Textiles were tiny.
Yeah, I know, exactly.
Totally.
And, I think that's just, the bureaucracy catches up so much later, and I feel good that, Senator Wyden looked at the ITC and said, you guys are capable of doing this, and you've really, we dig down deep into steel statistics and chemical statistics and so forth, and I think it's a credit to your kind of conversations with the Finance Committee and the Ways and Means Committee that they, tasked us with doing something and kind of moving ourselves into more of that area. But I think you raise a good point. I mean, are we organized correctly at this point? It's because we really do exist on our old organizations. But I think, you'll see in the TPP negotiation where there's really a clear trade-off in some of the priorities that have organized trade policy in the past. And I think things will change, based on some of these new agreements that we get.
Let me one more. I'd be remiss to do this, although if my staff haven't warned you, but part of an important role that you all have played is in intellectual property enforcement. And there's a lot of discussion and controversy about exactly, not just what the international rules should be in the intellectual property area, but the way in which they're advocated, up for negotiation, and ultimately enforced. And that is, if you give a little thought about, are there specific changes, perhaps, that you might like to see in terms of your authority, of resources, of how, the standards that you have to apply. Some say are not necessarily flexible enough or encompassing enough to deal with the complexity of modern transactions and, the thousands of patents that may be in a product. And just talk a little bit about that, if you would.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're talking about 337 in particular, or yeah. I mean, it's an interesting statute, and it was originally drafted in 1930, but it's been amended a couple of times, but not recently. And we actually just had a pretty interesting decision related to digital downloads that were saved to a server in Houston and made in 3D printing product that was infringing. Was really manufactured in a 3D printer based on infringing material coming from Pakistan. So, can we strike the right balance of enforcing, where there is infringement going on that's clearly demonstrated, and can we be sensitive to the new complexities in the economy? And actually, the statute's set up with a very strong kind of a fact-finding piece of it, and then consider the violations, and then also balanced against the public interest. And there's this, competition and effect on consumers and so forth. There's all concepts that are encompassed in the public interest determination that we make. And if you'll look at sort of some of our decision making, it's is becoming more sensitive to a lot of the concerns that we're hearing from, constituents and industry groups like yourself. So I think a lot of these cases end up having to be thought about at a very close level, individual facts of the case, and weighing that against the legal standards. But I think we've got the flexibility to do it, and we have been, able to change. We may be not changing fast enough for some people's taste, but there is a lot of flexibility there.
Just follow up, have you considered whether or not any statutory changes should be recommended? Are you satisfied where it is, or? Well,
we have to say very much we're not a policymaking organization, and we don't particularly recommend statutory changes. Off the record, I think there's an awful lot of flexibility there, and it's really based on how the commissioners read the general objectives of the statute, and also how the parties argue the cases. And so I think, in all honesty, I'm not sure that I would be recommending statutory changes, because I think the statute is standing the test of time. But I think Congress will be thinking about it, and is thinking about it now. So as an independent agency that doesn't make policy, we wait to look at the law that Congress gives us to enforce. Good. Thank you. I really enjoyed it, and I appreciate your time on a